Welcome to an interview with Aviation Lovers QLD. Today is an interview with Cathy Babis. She'll be the first female to fly around Australia in a seaplane, marking 100 years since the Air Force tripped around Australia. How did you get into aviation?
How did I get started in aviation? My father had a business at an airport installing avionics in airplanes. So I've been around airplanes since I was 5 years old. As a matter of fact, the airport was my Girl Scout cookie route. And when I was 13, I joined what's called in the United States Civil Air Patrol.
Oh, that
Civil Air
sounds cool.
Patrol, it's a civilian auxiliary of the United States Air Force for kids. And we learned about search and rescue, how to be an observer in a search plane. In the United States, Civil Air Patrol has responsibility for all search and rescues on the land part of our country. And we also helped in floods. But every time you earned a rank, we became like sergeants and lieutenants and captains and things. And we learned how to salute and military customs and courtesies. And three of my brothers also joined along with me. So we had a good time. We made a lot of good friends, and that's how I was able to solo. I got a solo scholarship through Civil Air Patrol. I had to pay 1/3. My group, which is the next level up from my squadron, paid part of it, and the state of Ohio, which is where I was living at the time, paid part of it. So I paid 1/3 of what it would have cost in 1970 to get that total scholarship was $300.
That's mind-blowing.
Instructor, it was $15 an hour and including fuel.
What was that first solo like?
Well, one other piece of my advice is never be afraid to change instructors if you find that you aren't happy or aren't being served as a student. And I had about 10 hours of my 15-hour scholarship, and I knew I was nowhere near soloing. I couldn't even fly straight and level. And so I changed instructors, and I was so fortunate to get a lady instructor. And in one lesson, she taught me how to do straight and level, and then bam, 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 everything happened. So one day we were in the pattern, practicing circuits, and she said, if you don't get these landings better, you are never going to solo. And I'm like, oh, I only have 2 hours left on my scholarship. And we got off the runway, and we turned the wrong direction from where we usually do. And she
Okay.
was like whispering to the control tower. And it turned out we went to the ramp where my dad's office was, and she signed my papers and gave me the talk about what happens when you solo, and off we went. But that is not the most exciting part. We were in a Cherokee 140,
Okay.
and it has a door that only shuts on the passenger side, and it locks. So I asked for takeoff, and I got on the runway, and I start rolling down the runway. I get about ready for takeoff, and the door pops open. And I'm, oh my God. And so I start reaching over to try to pull it closed and latch it, and I can't. And I'm accelerating and accelerating. And now the airplane wants to go, and now there's not enough runway. So I take off, and I decided, well, it's not going to blow open. So So I took off. I made the worst circuit in history, nowhere near a rectangle. And I started getting close to a Cessna 150 that was in front of me because they're a little slower than the Cherokee. And the tower told me that I needed to slow down. And the first thing I did was touch my brakes. Well, that's not how you slow down in the air.
Oh no.
And
Oh.
I just remember thinking, oh, that was stupid. But I managed to probably not slow down, but the tower still let me do my touch and go. But then the next time around, I got too close to the Cessna, and she made me go around. Well, we'd only ever practiced one go around that very day. And I'm like, oh no, full power. What do I do with the flaps? Okay, I have to take them off one at a time, you know? So another terrible circuit. Now I'm wondering, because she told me to do 2 touch and goes and a full stop. And I'm wondering, did that count because I didn't touch down? And it was getting near sunset. So I decided it didn't count. So I went around, and when I landed, the sun was just below the horizon, and I taxied back to the ramp to pick up my instructor. And I was very happy that I had soloed, but I had this little white blouse on, sleeveless cotton blouse, and it was soaked. You could see everything through
Oh
that blouse. But, and you know, it was very hard to hear the tower because all that noise, because I did my whole solo with the door open and wind coming in.
no.
So
It sounds it sounds like a good um one to put in a book, and a little movie is like a little aviation movie. That would be perfect.
well, I actually have a little collection of my aviation stories. I'm trying to put them together in a theme, and maybe this seaplane adventure might have something to add to it and give me a theme.
Well, yeah, you can always put it in a video or a documentary of yourself, and you can add the little stories and photos and maybe put it into a
Mhm.
little documentary movie.
Well, you know, back then we didn't have cell phones and cameras. You had to, number one, have the camera, and number two, every photo you had to pay to have developed.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as, people weren't as photo happy as they are now because it wasn't convenient and it was kind of expensive. But you know, we also ought to talk about why you're even talking to me tonight. And that's because
Yes.
I'm going to become the very first female seaplane pilot in history to fly a seaplane all the way around the perimeter of Australia. And then we're just doing the mainland. We're not going to Tasmania.
So I think it gets very choppy going to Tasmania. I don't know if you heard about our legendary Bass Strait. The little part in between Victoria and Tasmania can get very hairy.
Well, they went the last time David did it. The person I'm flying with is David Gears, and it's his seaplane, and he did it in 2014 for the 90th anniversary. And they did go to Tasmania, and you're right, it was a little hairy, and that's why the decision this time is our flight is not going to Tasmania.
Oh, I know some people will challenge it though. It's a very Aussie thing to do, to have a go at it. Um, if you can go back in time, which pilot would you fly with, and why?
Well, I know this is going to sound very, very trite, but it's Amelia Earhart.
Oh
But
yeah.
but the reason it's Amelia Earhart is I actually am a historical reenactor, and I dress up like Amelia, and um, I give talks to Girl Scouts and schools and some community events, and I tell the story of what it was like growing up as Amelia and how she ended up being interested in flying. And I take it all the way up to when she departed for her trip. And when I arrive to the audience, I act like I'm all confused about how did I get here. The last thing I remember was taking off Fort Howland Island.
Oh,
And
is
that
that
stops all, yeah, that stops all those questions from happening. I've read several books by her and about her. The most recent book is called 20 Hours and 40 Minutes. And that's when she really became famous. And she was just a passenger. She was already a pilot, but she was just a passenger on a seaplane that took off from New York, or maybe at Massachusetts, somewhere on the East Coast, and flew up by Nova Scotia and across to one of those big islands over there, and ended up in England. And it was she was the first woman to cross the Atlantic as a passenger.
Ah,
And that is when she became famous for being a passenger flying in a seaplane. But she was chosen because she was well known as a pilot. She had already set a few records, but she wasn't famous then. But
I know a little bit about her. I've been watching, I know that she's been in some air races as well with a few other familiar female pilots.
mm-hmm.
And it's sort of like there's always that social aspect or entertainment factor, and some of them had the wow factor. So it's an amazing time. It really is.
Well, she had her own fashion line and she had her own luggage line.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There, I have seen Amelia Earhart luggage. It's very classy looking. I mean, it's the old fashioned, very looks like suitcases more than what we consider um, a a piece of luggage. Looks more like not a suitcase, but more like a briefcase, just a little bit bigger.
So she
And
invented the first pilot bag. The first, you know.
oh, I don't know, but the other book is that I really recommend is called For the Fun of It, and it's her autobiography. And she just has such a wonderful way of writing. She's very self-effacing. You know, she doesn't boast. She talks about how she's kind of stupid about this and she made a mistake about that. You know, she doesn't just all glorify herself. She is just her plain self, and it's really wonderful to read that book. Both books are written by her.
Oh, I'm going to have to write that one down because I would love to read that. It's good to know that when people do their autobiographies, they're true to themselves. Because, like with
Mhm.
me, when I fly, I'm pretty much true to myself because I know to some people, I'm a handful, and some people, I'm just me. Now, can you tell us more about this 100 years? So, 100 years, is it of the seaplane or going around
Well,
Australia?
I joined this adventure originally just to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Royal Australian Air Force flying the first seaplane around the perimeter of Australia. They had a lot of maintenance problems. It took them about 45 days. I named my Facebook page, It Takes 100 Years, because since I'm the first woman, it took 100 years for a woman to do it. So
Ah,
that's why my Facebook page is called It Takes 100
100
Years.
years. And you'll be joined with many others?
There are about 5 airplanes in our little gaggle. Each airplane is on their own, but we are coordinating and organizing together for things like lodging and fuel. And we think we have a person who might be providing some ground support with extra fuel and extra parts for the planes. But we are prepared to be self-sufficient in case, because you never know what happens in people's lives if maybe that person can't do it. And then it would be very difficult to find someone at the last minute.
There's always got to have a plan B and a C and maybe an E, F, G
Mm-hmm.
as well. So backup plans are always good. And I know it takes a long, long time to prepare for something this. Like you got to find your alternates. You got to find which airfields have got the fuel bowsers and which ones don't have lights. So it's very hectic to
Well,
plan.
we're going to have to pre-position some barrels of fuel that we purchase and put at certain places. We're going to have it trucked in the more remote areas where it's too far in between official fuel stops. And that's also very expensive.
Oh yes,
So,
it's not as cheap as what it was back then.
oh, absolutely.
What was your favorite aviation moment?
Um, My favorite aviation moment, well, I would like to break that up into two questions.
Okay,
One
okay.
being, what is your most fun aviation moment? And the second one, what is my most favorite? So, my most fun was the very first time I ever landed in a seaplane on the river where I was learning,
Okay.
because the type of plane we're flying is a Sea Ray, and it's a hull type, meaning it's not up on floats.
Yeah.
It's like a boat in the water. And when you land, it's like being in a bathtub on the water. Your rear end is below the water. You can stick your hand out and, touch the fish. And when we landed, and you land and the nose goes up, you're gonna stop it. And I just let out the biggest whoop. I bet they heard me 100 miles away. Well, my favorite was flying a brand new Cessna 152 in 1979 from the factory in Wichita, Kansas to Los Angeles. It's a very long flight. And because I worked for the biggest single engine Cessna dealer on the West Coast, we were always going and getting 152s. So several of my flight instructor friends had already done it. And they said, the one thing you need to do, Cathy, is do the best pre-flight you have ever done in your life. And now I know what has just happened before is that, remember that door plug that just flew out of that Boeing 737-9 Max, whatever it was?
Yes.
Well, there are mistakes made in the factory all the time. The first thing that happened is I'm doing the pre-flight and I see a haze on the windshield and I say, hey, can you get me something to squirt off? And I'm going to wipe the windshield. Well, it didn't clean off. It was paint overspray. So they had to go and take it back in and buff it out and get all the paint off the window. So then I went out to do my run up and I had 0 mag drop on 1 mag. Well, they put some stupid instrument up on the dash and said, no, our instrument says that it's fine. And I said, no, a P lead is probably not connected. And you're going to open the plane and look at the engine. And they insisted that they did not have to do that. And I just said, well, I'm not taking the plane then. And they opened the engine. Guess what they found?
Oh.
An unconnected P lead, because that's one of the things you check is, do you have a mag drop? If you have no mag drop, that's bad.
Yeah.
And if you have too much of a mag drop, that's bad. So they fix that and I taxi out again. I get on the runway this time. I take off and I'm looking and the plane wants to go and I have 0 airspeed around the pattern with no indicated airspeed, which you can do with power settings and the attitude of the airplane and the noise of the airplane. You can do that. But so I came back around, taxied back in, and I could just see these guys. Oh, this woman. And I said the highest it ever indicated was 20, and that's not right. So they found out that there was way back in the pitot system, there was a bug's nest, not something I could see on the pre-flight.
But they were just those remove tag before flights back then? Those little covers, the pitot covers?
They did, but I don't think the factory put them in. Those are aftermarket things. So thanks to my friends, I found all the things wrong and then hopped. And then what's really fun is that when you're flying a brand new airplane with a brand new engine, you have to break it in. And the procedure for breaking it in is full throttle all the time for the first 50 hours of flight. Even after you get it back to where it's going, the first 25 hours of flight have to be full throttle to break in the engine. At least that's the way it was in 1979. Maybe they've got better engines now. But I've had a lot of jobs in aviation. That was just one of them as a flight instructor. The first job I ever had was working a flight school desk. I was the girl at the counter who you scheduled your airplane and your instructor with, and I took your money. But then that school moved over into a bigger hangar, and I ended up doing rental cars and taking pilots to motels. I was 17 years old. It was a fun thing, but it was kind of a dead end job. There was nowhere to go from there, especially for a girl. And, we'll talk later, but, that's why I'm promoting STEM and diversity in aviation. I just wanted to go ahead, like a little laundry list of jobs. I joined the Army when I was 18. And I went into the recruiter and I said I wanted to fly helicopters. Well, back then, none of the military allowed female pilots at all. And so I said, well, okay, then I'll be the next best thing. I'll be an air traffic controller. So I stayed in the Army for 6 years. And they had a flying club, and I took advantage of that. And I got my commercial and my flight instructor and the engine, all before I went to Germany to live for 3 years. And when I got out of the Army, ultimately, I did some more flying, and I got my instrument instructor, and my multi-engine instructor. And I became a flight instructor at an airport in Southern California. It was a very, very busy time. Like I said, it was the biggest single engine Cessna dealer uh, on the West Coast at a very busy airport called Torrance, Torrance. Year, and I thought, well, if I want to go to the airlines, I'm going to need to get a degree. So I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, and I got my degree. And then I couldn't find a job, and I went back to the same place I was flight instructing, and I said, well, that's what a college degree will do for you. But actually, it did ultimately help me. But it was fun going back to my happy place, a place where I knew all the procedures, and I knew the people, and I knew all the checkpoints, all that. Then you may have heard there was an air traffic control strike in the United States when 15,000 air traffic controllers were fired. It might have been before you were born. It was 1981.
At the year I was born.
Okay. Well, so you may have heard of it, but you were not certainly aware of it. But our president, they went on strike, which they're technically not allowed to do. And so 15,000 controllers were fired. And since I already had the skills, I stopped instructing and I went back to air traffic controlling for the FAA. And I did that for a while. I'm not happy or proud to say this, but ultimately I got fired all by myself. That's a whole nother story that we're not going to talk about. But if somebody wants to buy me a beer or a glass of wine when I get there, I'll tell you that story. But I became married while I was a controller, and my husband and I we started a aircraft sales and maintenance outfit, and we did that for a couple years until we got robbed, and we kind of lost everything. So we moved to San Diego, California, and I became a chief instructor at one school there. And after we got divorced and I moved away, I became a chief instructor at another school in Illinois. And then I moved back home because I was divorced and I didn't have enough money. And I said, if I'm going to be miserable and broke, I'd rather be miserable and broke where I grew up rather than miserable and broke all by myself. So I went back home to Cincinnati, Ohio, where I grew up. And I did anything I could for a while, a lot of non-aviation things. But finally, I became a weather observer at my home airport, the same airport I soloed at. And I did that for about 2 years until I got my final job that I was able to retire from. I got a job with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And
cool.
And the requirements were to be a pilot or have an aviation degree or be an air traffic controller. And I had all those things. And so during my interview, they didn't believe, they thought I was making stuff up because there's just no way a girl had all that experience. And I talked to other people who had interviews, and none of them were asked the questions that I was. They asked me instrument questions on the chart, like, what's a MOCA? What's a minimum reception altitude? What does the little brown squiggly line mean? And it's like, I knew them because one of my other jobs before that I failed to mention is I taught written exam test prep. Now, not all the deep theory. I taught test preps, for several years on the weekends. And, the 2 and 3 day things that you pay a couple $100 to go to. I say those are for people who have more money than time, and studying on your own is for people who have more time than money. It all gets you to the same place. It's very important to know the theory. At NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, what we did is we made instrument flying charts and instrument approach plates for US military pilots to use to fly around worldwide. And I actually became the first female program manager in the history of the agency. And they'd been doing that for 40 years. And I was the first female program manager. And then after I became one, then there were several behind me.
I was talking to you about STEM. Talk a little bit about the STEM programs and what it does.
You're really hitting on my passion now, because that's what David and I are promoting as we go around. We're promoting STEM education, offered and encouraged to everyone, especially diverse communities such as females and original natives, people of all genders, colors, whatever, because they are so woefully misrepresented. I went to a website doing a little research for today, and worldwide, only 5% of commercial pilots are females. Now, Australia does a little better. Australia, you're up to about 10%. And India, yeah, and India is the best. And India has 20% commercial pilots. Now, because the study was done by ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, I assume they know what we mean in aviation by commercial pilot, and it's not airline pilot. Commercial pilot is like a limousine driver for a car. You're allowed to charge money to take people places. So a flight instructor needs a commercial license. A pipeline patrol person needs a commercial license. But to be an airline pilot as a captain, you need to have your airline transport pilot license. And there, women are only about 2% worldwide. But as commercial pilots, and I think they lumped the ATPs in there with commercial pilots because it's commercial pilots and above. And that's a really sad statistic, because the statistic when I was learning was 5 or 6%. And in the United States, I think we're at about 7%, maybe 8% if I'm being generous. But Australia wins. You're at 10%.
We're getting there, Ron. We're traveling around Australia. How did it actually come about?
Well, this is the truth. It's because I spend too much time on Facebook.
No, you don't.
It was 4th of July last year, and I was a little bored, and I thought, I wonder what's happening in this seaplane group I belong to. And so I'm scrolling the group, and I get back to June, and I see this post from this guy, and it's David Gears, and he's actually the former president of the the Seaplane Pilot Association of Australia, and he's still a committee member of them. And he's had his plane, he
for a
told
long
me,
time, I think.
a long time. It just got a new engine. And anyway, he posted, "Adventure of a lifetime. Who wants to come along and share expenses while we take 60 days to fly around the perimeter of Australia?" Well, I'm retired, and I kind of keep my life what I call deliciously unscheduled.
Yeah.
And I have a passport. I'm adventurous. And so I thought, oh, surely he's found someone. It's been 5 weeks. But I messaged him, and he messaged me back, and I asked him, had he found anyone yet? And he said, well, I found some people that just want to go part of the way, but I want somebody who wants to go all the way around with me. And I said, I could do that. And he said, send me, some information about yourself. So I did. And I said some funny things besides my aviation experience. I said things like, I don't snore.
Yeah.
I don't get hangry. You know, as a matter of fact, one of the things I do routinely is I fast. So I don't care if there's not 3 meals a day. That doesn't bother me in the least. You know, if we're somewhere remote and we can't eat, I'm not going to turn hangry on him. And I told him if he asked me to sing, he would be sorry.
Yeah.
And
But we all have that inner diva, you know. We can sing in the
yeah.
car.
Oh well, no, it doesn't stop me from singing, but you know, my family, I did share with you, probably it didn't make the cut, but my family has a Zoom every Sunday night, and we sing happy birthday to each other, and it's the worst cacophony you ever heard in your life. I mean, nobody is on the same tune. We're all horrible, except my sister. But because we're all horrible, it makes her sound bad too. It's
Oh no.
terrible.
Well, you got to keep in line with the group. It's called Harmony, family style.
Hmm.
I love it. Now, on your adventure, what do you hope to see around Australia? Is there anything that particularly you wanted to see or do, or you're just going to go with it?
Well, David has a bunch of pictures from the last time he did it in 2014. And so I want to see the Kimberleys. I want to see those big cliffs that look like somebody took a bite out of it. I want to see the 12 apostles. I want to see the whale sharks swimming out in Western Australia, the deserts. The Kimberleys, I've heard, are just gorgeous. I mean, just like the United States is a huge country. As
I
a matter
can't.
of fact, fun fact, Australia is only 1,000 miles less around than the United States.
Oh yeah, I look at the maps and seeing the sizing. We're sort of close, but they come
Very
up with
close.
all this statistics and stuff. But I find Australia looks like, if you look at a map of Africa, and
Hmm.
Africa on the side almost looks like Australia, just on a bit of a angle. And I thought, oh, that's something I never thought of. But it
Yeah.
works. It works. But for you to see the Glasshouse Mountains at Caboolture, it's when you take
Oh,
off and you've got the beautiful. That's why I love Caboolture so much. You take off on runway 11. You see Bribie or the ocean, and then you take off on 29, and then you see the beautiful Glasshouse Mountains. You would totally love it.
we're going to be flying the Romeo 5 route, which is the route that only seaplanes and helicopters can take through Sydney Harbor. So we're going to get to do that. And 2 years ago, I flew a Cessna 210 with a friend from Alabama up to Massachusetts, and we flew up the Hudson River, and we were lower than the tops of all the buildings. And that's the river that Captain Sully landed in
Yes.
when the geese got his engines.
The one thing I love about aviation is everyone you meet is friendly and caring, and great advice. Any advice for future pilots?
Well, it depends where you are, but I'm going to talk to student pilots, people who are just learning how to fly. I'm constantly mentoring everybody for everything. But number one, before you start, make sure you have enough money to finish. Because one of the most disappointing things as a flight instructor is to have this student that's doing so well and they run out of money. And when you stop flying, you lose a lot of your skills. And so then you have to spend that money again. The next thing to do besides have the money is get your medical out of the way, because some things can come up that don't come up in a regular doctor's office, and that's disqualifying. It's not disqualifying for your life, but it's disqualifying for aviation. So don't spend money flying until you know that you're going to be able to get your physical. And sometimes, it's months. If you've come up with a challenge, you've got to do all kinds of extra tests and things, and you want to jump through all those hoops before you start spending a lot of money on flying. But I do recommend the next thing is that you take 2 to 3 lessons, just so that you learn what it feels like to take off and to stall and do a steep turn. And then stop flying and study your theory and get those writtens out of the way. So now you have your money, you have your medical, you have your theory done. And now it's just the fun stuff. So many people keep putting off the theory, putting off taking their exams, and now they're all ready. They've got all their time, they've got their skills, but they haven't passed the written, and they're under severe stress.
Yes.
Last thing is to schedule 3 times a week, because if you schedule 3 times a week, you're only going to fly about 2 times a week on average, because there's going to be bad weather, there's going to be bad airplanes, and there's going to be bad other pilots who bring their planes back. They're not bad, but let's say they had to go someplace and wait for gas, so they couldn't get back on time, and now your lessons is ruined.
It's
Happens all the time. All those things happen. So if you schedule 3 lessons a week, you're probably only going to get in 2. Sometimes you'll get in 3.
This one's a cool one. Where would you like to end up in the next 10 years?
Well, that's a really fun question, because at the end of our trip, I'm turning 70 years old. So in 10 years, I hope to still be healthy, happy, active, mentoring, and flying. That's my short answer. Maybe David and I will go around again for the 110th anniversary. Who knows?
Well, we could do that. Do a 10-year anniversary. Like I did that with a Tiger Boss. Less than 70 days departure from Brisbane. Remind us once more, how can we follow along? So give us all the details and about you around the Australia. How can we follow you? Where can we go? Give us a bit.
Well, we have a website, which it is my task to update. The original website was designed to attract pilots and seaplanes to come along on the adventure. And so it's still sort of set up that way. And I have the password to edit the website, and I am teaching myself. And it's going to be wholly reorganized, hopefully within a week, unless I get stuck somewhere. So the website is www.100asa.com.au. So 100 is the 100 years, and I think ASA is Australian Seaplane Association, just to put seaplane in there. That website has maps. We have 3 groups that have already said what their paths are, that are going different directions. And we have maps that show you, like where we're planning to stop. We also have a list of places we're planning to stop. And one of the things, if you're an aviator and you're listening and you live around the perimeter, look at our list. And we would be so grateful if we could get free lodging, homestays, gym floors, anything. We'll sleep under the wing of the plane, but of course we'd love to have beds too. But all that information is going to be sorted through that website. And then of course my Facebook page that we've mentioned, called It Takes 100 Years. And it's called that again because I'm the first female to do it after it was first done 100 years ago. I do have an Instagram account, which is at Cathy Babis, CathyBabis. But I'm just learning about Instagram. I know it's where all you young people are, and I am planning a YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel, but it has nothing on it right now. I have it. It's my name. So once it's there, I will promote it on the website and on the Facebook page, and so then people will be able to watch videos. One of the things, I just want to mention one thing.
Oh, keep going. I got it.
Weight is very, very important, because this seaplane only has a max gross weight of, I think, 1,652 pounds, something like that. And that's us, our spare parts, our life jackets, our clothing for 60 days. And I have committed to David that I will only bring 13 pounds of personal stuff, 6 kilograms. So that includes my glasses, the clothes on my back. It includes everything, my phone. And so David and I are both on weight loss plans, because every 6 pounds is a gallon of gas. And the unique thing about seaplanes versus airplanes is that an airplane can go down the runway, and most of the time you can keep going farther and farther and farther, and the airplane will just want to fly. And then you can go along in ground effect. And, even if you're overloaded, you can still get off the ground. Not so in the water. If you've ever water skied,
Oh.
have you ever water skied?
No, I've been in a seaplane up at Marucci,
Hmm.
Paradise Seaplanes, and I thought that was fantastic.
Well, if whether it's on floats or in a hull, seaplanes on the front of them have a thing called the step. And, on a hull type, the step is like this, and then there's literally a step, and then you get the rear of the fuselage.
Okay.
And when you're, let's just talk about water skis, because you've probably seen people water ski. When
Yeah.
they start in the water with their skis up like this. And then as the boat begins to pull them, their skis tip.
Yeah.
That's called on the step. And the seaplane has to get on the step in order to build up any speed. If it just goes because it's too heavy, it will never get off the ground and the water. And the only way to remedy that is to throw stuff out that you already only have 13 pounds for 60 days.
Oh,
So we have to be very, very careful about our weight. If we plan, we're going to land on the land and in the water, depending on where we are. And the thing that we really have to plan for is if we're going to land in the water and we know we're heavy, we have to make sure we land with less gas. But then that means a shorter hop the next day. But the gas is the only thing we control if we don't both lose the weight we have committed to. And I have firmly committed to getting to a specific weight. And I have some ways to go, but I'm going to make it.
now it's getting close to the day coming. When do you take off from Caboolture?
We take off, I think we originally were going to take off March 31st, but now we're probably going to take off March 30th. And
Oh,
I have to get my ASIC personal interview once I get there, because you can only get an ASIC red card with a personal interview and an Australian address.
ah.
So, but I have to get a big security check where they call the United States and I don't know, the FBI, somebody who, makes sure that I am not a danger to your society. And this is the same thing that happens when Australian pilots come to the United States. They have to also go through the same thing
I've
to
heard
be able
that
to
you have to
fly
go
here.
through a massive process to convert and a lot of paperwork. So what I say in aviation is paperwork for paperwork because of the paperwork.
Right.
That's the end of the interview. It was nice meeting you. I can't wait to see you at Caboolture, and I want to be there when you take off. So, when you come in, or if you see me up at Caboolture, I'll come and say hello or message. And I can't wait to hear all about your adventures. I want to see photos, videos, whatever you got, because it looks like an epic adventure. So I'm going to say g'day from Australia to USA, and I can't wait to see
Good.
you.
Okay.
Interview. I can't wait to see her adventure. Now, if you want to keep up with their adventures or like to help in the way of accommodation for a place to sleep or meals or fueling or an airfield that can accommodate, please help out their adventure to head to www.100asa.com.au, and then, or you can help them out on Facebook. It takes 100 years. Until next time, happy flying.